Okay, welcome. If you're in the right place, you're here for Agape Circle, a practical way to foster communion in love in the parish setting. And we have Deacon Dr. Marcos Nickolas.
Is this supposed to be on?
Psychotherapist at Inner Resources Counseling in Marblehead, Massachusetts, and a visiting assistant professor at Salem State University, Salem, Massachusetts. And he's going to share with us something he's been working on for some time and also give us a practical demonstration of it. So, welcome.
Thank you. We have the best news in the world. Nobody has better news than the church. Past forgiven, purpose for living, home in heaven, freedom from guilt, freedom from boredom, freedom from meaninglessness, a purpose in life, meaning, significance, grace, strength, power, wisdom. Those are the words of Pastor Rick Warren, the founder of Saddleback Church in California. In 1980, Pastor Rick and his wife Kay held a Bible study with 7 other people, and that was how they started their church. In the 4 decades that followed, Saddleback has grown to include 10 Southern Californian campuses, averaging 27,000 weekly worshipers and 7,500 small group meetings in homes. We have the best news in the world, past forgiven, purpose for living, home in heaven, freedom from guilt, freedom from boredom, freedom from meaninglessness, a purpose in life, significance, grace, strength, power, wisdom. Pastor's words stopped there, but had he continued, I'm sure he would have added a few more things to the list of gifts that the church offers the world. Above all, the gift of the Holy Spirit and eternal life in God's limitless love, the love of the Holy Trinity. God is love, writes the evangelist John in his letter, 1 John 4:16. According to Metropolitan Jesulis, love is constitutive of God's being. Love is God's mode of existence as Trinity of Father, Son, and Spirit in eternal communion. Communion in love is similarly constitutive of Adam, the human being, whom God created from the earth in the divine image. Sin entails a breakdown in the communion in love, but through his mediation, Christ has opened a way for fallen human beings to participate in the communion in love of the Holy Trinity. We have the best news in the world, but does America and the rest of the world still need this good news of the Christian church? Do people still need eternal life, eternal communion in love, beginning in the here and now? Well, the human death rate continues unabated at an impressive 100%. And then there's quality of life. Yesterday, Deacon Perry cited sobering statistics from the Health Resources and Service Administration that 1 in 5 Americans say they feel lonely or socially isolated. 2 in 5 report that they sometimes or always feel their social relationships are not meaningful. Nearly 1 out of 3 older Americans lives alone, and for young people, anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide have increased rapidly since 2012. And 142 people are dying every day from drug overdoses in America. Last May, I heard an interesting interview done with Dr. Dean Ornish, a well-known cardiologist. I ask my patients, said Ornish, why do you smoke? Why do you overeat? Why do you drink too much? Why do you work so hard? Why do you abuse substances? These behaviors seem so maladaptive to me. And they looked at me and said, they're not maladaptive. They're very adaptive. They help us deal with our loneliness, our depression, our pain. I've had patients say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes. Are you going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or food fills that void. Or we have an opioid epidemic now of numbing the pain, or alcohol, or video games, or surfing the web, or working all the time. We have lots of ways of dealing with the pain. And Ornish continues, there's been a radical reduction in our social networks. 50 years ago, most people had an extended family they saw regularly, a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people, a job that felt secure when you really got to know your coworkers who've been there for a decade or more, a church or synagogue or a club that you went to regularly. And for many people, they don't have any of those things today, and virtual communities are not the same. The more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are. Why is that? Because it's not an authentic intimacy. Intimacy is all about connecting in an authentic and real way. And when you grow up in a family with 2 or 3 generations of people, they don't just know your Facebook profile. They know your demons and your darkness and where you messed up. And you know that they know. And they know that you know that they know. And they're still there for you. And there's something primal. There's something primal about the human need we have for authentic connection with each other. To me, anything that brings people together is healing. That's Dr. Dean Ornish. Anything that brings people together in authentic connection is healing. Authentic connection, of course, is what Jesus Christ and his church is all about. Connection with his eternal Father, the source of our life, and connection with one another in the Holy Spirit, in the communion of divine love that is eternal life. Divine love manifested in and by Jesus is what marks the faithful, as we read in the Gospel of John. By this all will know that you are my disciples if you love one another, John 13:35. Then there are the epistles of St. Paul, who speaks of the church as the body of Christ in Romans and 1 Corinthians and Colossians and Ephesians. The Eucharist is simultaneously a koinonia with God and Christ, says 1 Corinthians 1:9, and with one another. We, being many, are one body in Christ, and everyone members of one of another. Therefore, putting away lying, let every man speak truth with his neighbor, exhorts the apostle, for we are members one of another. That's Ephesians 4:25. Among the members of the church, there must be no division, etc. He goes on, calling us to a way of love for one another. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, pleads St. Paul to the Colossians. Above all, put on love, which binds all together in perfect unity. Colossians 3:12 through 14. And the same he says to the Romans, the Corinthians, and the Galatians, and the Philippians, the Thessalonians, to everyone. And since we are now in the church of Saints Peter and Paul here in Glenview, let me quote the Apostle Peter. By his wounds we have been healed, he says. Be you all of one mind, having compassion one for another. Love each other as brethren. Be sympathetic, courteous, be merciful. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins. That's 1 Peter 4:8. Given that the church is called to be the place where we can experience communion in the God who is love, it stands to reason that people who enter into the church would experience a felt sense of communion in love, not only in the sacred mysteries and the holy services and the holy scriptures, but also interpersonally in fellowship. And that is exactly what I myself experienced growing up in my Greek Orthodox Church of the Assumption in Seattle, Washington, particularly in my teen years. But I've also seen that in many parishes it is not so easy to access that warmth of fellowship. There can sometimes be an anonymity, especially in some of our larger parishes, and this is a problem. We go to church for love, wrote Father Alexander Schmemann, for the new love of Christ himself, which is granted to us in our unity. Too often, however, even while standing in the church, we continue to sense some people as neighbors and others as strangers, a faceless mass that has no relevance to us and to our prayer. This is a problem. It is a problem. I think it is a serious problem, especially in view of the Holy Scriptures and our Orthodox theology of God as the communion of love to which we are invited through the sacrifice of our Lord and on the cross for us, out of love, the ultimate gift of love, and his gift of eternal life. And it was to address this problem that the Agape Circle small group program was created in 2007, 12 years ago. The goal was to provide one practical way for Orthodox Christians to taste the Church's theology of communion and love as a felt experience. I had a sense that small groups could enable authentic connection. That was supported by the research I read. For example, Wuthnow, 1991 and 94, did extensive research that led him to the following conclusion. He's a sociologist. Small groups make a difference to the spiritual lives of their members, mostly by demonstrating love, by nurturing intimate relationships, and by giving people an opportunity to tell their stories. They provide a context in which people can rethink themselves and their values. The sacred texts become real to them as they try to apply those stories to their lives. In the process, they are inspired to lead better lives. Actually, that one was 1994. Galota wrote in 2005, "New behaviors are best learned in small groups. Small groups afford the opportunity for natural caregiving to occur, for competencies to be nurtured, and change agendas to be developed." Other benefits have been described in the literature. Put in terms of the model highlighted in this study, I was asking, could parish-based small groups be structures in which adults of the Greek Orthodox Church could experience interpersonally the reality of communion in otherness and otherness in communion that their theological tradition calls koinonia and agape. I came across the pioneering work of the Russian Orthodox sociologist Petrim Sorokin, who lived from 1889 to 1968 and taught at Harvard University, where he established the Harvard Research Center in Creative Altruism. His 1954 publication, The Ways and Power of Love, seems to be the first comprehensive social scientific treatment of love. In 3 chapters on the techniques of altruistic transformation, Sorokin lists and describes 26 techniques. One of them, number 13, is called the technique of exposure to friendship and love of others. He writes, "The technique of exposure of the individuals and groups to the genuine friendship, love, and goodwill of others through friendly feelings, thoughts, words, and deeds is likely to be one of the most effective methods for altruistic purposes." I delved also into attachment theory by John Bowlby and various other strains of social science. And then I did a study with Greek Orthodox. The quantitative portion of the study used a waitlist control design, a pre- and post-quasi-experimental design, and with 2 7-week periods over which change could occur, the waitlist period and the intervention period. Eligible candidates were aged 21 through 65, members of parishes in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America who attended worship services at least 3 times per month. 230 participants were recruited. And groups of approximately 5 to 10 people were formed that met for 7 weeks consecutively, ending before Thanksgiving in 2007. They were encouraged to arrange for their meetings to take place in homes or at the local parish with the permission of the presbyter. 41 small groups were formed in 29 parishes across the United States, in 15 states. There were 8 groups in Washington State, 6 in California, 2 in Georgia, 1 in Alabama, 1 in South Carolina, 2 in New Jersey, 1 in New York, 1 in Rhode Island, 6 in Massachusetts, 1 in New Hampshire, 2 in Pennsylvania, 5 in Ohio, 1 in Wisconsin, 2 in Illinois, and 1 in Missouri. Each group met for 7 weeks for 2 hours per meeting. The objective was to enable the participants to experience communion and love as measured quantitatively by increases in self-reported perceptions of social support and a positive change in attitude reflective of compassionate love, particularly towards strangers and all humanity. And the small group meetings were structured as follows. Number 1, opening prayers. 2, a moment of silence. 3, an interactive exercise. 4. Sacred readings. 5. Questions for silent reflection. 6. Structured contemplative dialogue. 7. A weekly challenge. And 8. A closing intercessory prayers and hymns. When speaking, participants were encouraged to speak freely, either in response to the questions for silent reflection or to the previous weekly challenge, or if they preferred, to share whatever was in their hearts that was relevant to the theme of agape in one's life, by which was meant one's love for God, for other people, and for one's own spirit. They were invited to speak of their own experience while remaining in touch with their present feelings. Participants were also given control over the matter of receiving feedback from others or not, and the kinds of feedback they would want to receive. One was always free to pass on any activity or to use less than his or her allotted time when sharing. They were encouraged to reveal themselves at the pace and to the extent that they felt comfortable. The second largest portion of time in the 2-hour meeting was devoted to the interactive exercise of the week, which corresponded to various themes for each week, all of which were sub-themes under agape, aspects of agape: trust, humility, generosity, various themes. So then the following self-report instruments were used to measure the intervention's effectiveness in terms of hypotheses that I'll name below. But first, the instruments were there was a demographic background questionnaire, which obtained data about gender, age, marital status, ethnicity, residence, birthplace, country of origin, religious background, church attendance, level of education, level of household income, and occupation. There was the medical outcomes study, social support survey that measures the perceived availability of 5 dimensions of functional support: emotional support, informational support, tangible support, positive social interaction, affectionate support. Those were the 5 on that scale, general social support scale. And then there was a church-based social support scale, which was designed by Neil Krauss, a researcher on this, in 2004 and 5. And it assessed the extent to which the participants perceive their life experience to be valued by their fellow congregants. It then asks respondents to assess their perception of the emotional support and instrumental, tangible support that they receive from others in their congregation, as well as the social support that they give to others in their congregation, and the emotional support and the instrumental support and that they give, and also the support they anticipate receiving from their church family should they need it, as well as the negative interactions they have with their fellow congregants, and the spiritual support they receive from them, and their own level of church-related service. That was all under the church-based social support scale. There was the compassionate love scale, which was developed in 2005 by Sprecher and Furr, and this particularly focused on, I used the version of it that focused on providing on an attitude of compassionate love, especially towards people who are perceived to be suffering or in need, and particularly towards strangers and towards humanity as a whole. So examples of the questions that are on the compassionate love scale include: when I see people I do not know feeling sad, I feel a need to reach out to them. It is easy for me to feel the pain and joy experienced by others, even though I do not know them. If I encounter a stranger who needs help, I would do almost anything I could to help him or her. I feel a selfless caring for most of humankind. I accept others whom I do not know, even when they do things I think are wrong. I very much wish to be kind and good to fellow human beings. So these are these are the items, and then people are supposed to rate themselves, their attitude, 1 to 5, on those types of questions. And interestingly, other studies by Sprecher and Fair found that compassionate love for strangers is very correlated with, it's a very strong predictor of helping behavior, of actual behavior, and it's a stronger predictor than empathy is. And also, they found that compassionate love for strangers is experienced more regularly by those who frequently attend religious services as compared to those who do not. So in addition, there was the Marlowe-Crown Social Desirability Scale to assess the extent to which responses seem to reflect distorted self-perceptions, which might be motivated by a concern for positive self-presentation. And then finally, there was an intervention scale that was designed for this study in which, among other things, open-ended questions were asked so that subjects could provide responses in their own words to the experience of the 7-week program. So again, a total of 230 volunteers qualified for this study, but then 27 subjects withdrew, so that was 12%, and a total of 203 completed the second survey, which I call Time 2, and 196 completed the third survey, Time 3, and then there was a 4% attrition rate during the period of the intervention. So that brought the number of completers down to 176. The hypotheses, the first predicted that change in general social support during the course of the intervention time, Time 2 to Time 3, would exceed any positive change that occurred in the measure during the baseline waiting period. And indeed, there was. Although not a very large increase, it was statistically significant, 4.3% increase in general social support as a result of the intervention. The second hypothesis predicted that the change in church-based social support would be greater than the waitlist period. And again, in this case, the change was very robust, and the hypothesis was strongly supported. There was a strong increase in perceived church-based social support that the subjects expressed. And the third hypothesis predicted the change, an increase in the level of compassionate love. And this hypothesis was less strongly supported, but still strongly supported with a significant increase in compassionate love. People who participated in the Agape Circle small group program, on average, developed a more compassionate attitude towards strangers and humankind than they had prior to the course. On the basis of participants' self-reports, the intervention appears to have fulfilled its primary purpose of facilitating increases in general social support, especially church-based social support, and compassionate love. Responses to the open-ended questions on the third survey, as well as subsequent informal communications, suggest that ongoing friendships also developed among a number of participants as a result of their shared experience in the Agape Circle program. The quality of their relationships with their fellow parishioners seems to have improved. They feel closer to others in their congregation, and their experience of the weekly social hour has become more meaningful. In closing, I'd like to share with you some of the comments that participants wrote in the open-ended questions on the third assessment. One person wrote, "I have opened up to others again, and in turn, others have as well. I risked, and I feel enlivened. The group helped me let go of pain and guilt." Another, "I am trying to spend more one-on-one time with my family and telling them I love them more." Another person, "I've felt more devoted to prayer and more support than ever before." Another, I've grown even closer to members of my Agape circle. It gives me extra joy in participating in church events with them. And another, I may not be arguing with my husband as much? ? I'm also reminded once again that everyone has their own trials and tribulations, and it's important to be aware of that and not just dwell on our own problems. And another, I'm able to interact with others without a certain fear and anxiety that I possessed over the past several years. And finally, I have felt a release within me. I was hanging on to some old hurts that I could not seem to shake off, even after I had prayed about them. Somehow, sharing about them in the context of the lessons helped me to see my part, and mostly, how much God loves me. If pastors are to help people become more loving as Jesus bids, then they must create opportunities for people to feel heard and accepted as valued members in the fellowship of the church. The data provided by the empirical component of this study indicates that a small group program such as the one described here may be one practical and effective way of accomplishing this goal for a significant number of people. For this reason, we are reviving Agape Circle in 2020, and you can find more information by visiting joinagapecircle.com. And in the future, there'll be more content available at agapecircle.com, but right now we're setting up a landing page at joinagapecircle.com. And I'd like to invite everyone in OCAMPR and anyone who's so inclined to consider leading a 6-week Agape Circle at your parish in the new year. In closing, I'd like to leave you with this image from the 6th century spiritual father, Abba Dorotheus of Gaza. Suppose there is a circle on the earth, as if drawn by a compass. Let's suppose that this circle is the world, and God is the center. The straight lines drawn from the circumference to the center are the lives of men. The saints, desiring to approach God, move inward. As far as they approach God, they approach each other. As far as they approach each other, they approach God. This is the very nature of love. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce from the West Coast, Father Isaac Skidmore. Father Isaac Skidmore. We were friends back in the Northwest from childhood, from our teen years. Please come forward.
Do we go right into this paper reading, or do we?
Looks like he's changed it.
Oh.
These will be two separate things. Cut it off and let me introduce him. Our topic is isolation, violence, hope, and communion, the inner structure of Holy Week and its spiritual and therapeutic significance. I'd like to welcome Father Isaac Skidmore, a PhD, adjunct instructor, clinical mental health counseling with Southern Oregon University, and auxiliary priest at Archangel Gabriel Orthodox Church in Ashland, Oregon. Welcome, Father.
Thank you. I'd like to begin with a vignette. Early in my work as a therapist, as I was counseling a woman in substance abuse recovery, I had an experience that confirmed the capacity for dialogue between what takes place in therapy and the Orthodox liturgical tradition. This woman, in our work together, had begun to experience a degree of safety, aided by the inpatient setting she was in, and clarity, aided by a period of abstinence from her preferred substance. In this context, she began to access traumatic memories that had the capacity to overwhelm her. She would hang her head and weep from hurt, fear, guilt, or sadness, depending on the theme of what was coming to mind at the moment. Her posture and voice indicated age regression, corresponding with periods of time from which the memories originated. My work was one of moderating her experience. Through my tone of voice and words of measured assurance, attempting to hold her at the threshold of grounded security in the present, yet also allowing her to dip into remembrance of things that only moments before had been inaccessible. As she wept, I felt myself in the presence of something holy, to which I was both attendant and witness. I gave myself permission to think simultaneously in two frames of reference, the one pertaining to therapeutic theory, the other to my priestly sacramental role, although the setting we were in had no ecclesiastical affiliation. I was, thus, an attendant to Holy Penthos, and she was being cleansed, baptized even, in these precious tears. I did not use that particular language with her in that setting, but I knew the reality of what I was perceiving. I felt nothing lacking in this baptismal sacrament in which she was partaking, except, ironically, water, a font, in the formal structure of a liturgical service. If I had been overly rigid in segregating the domains of church and therapy, I might have been unable to recognize the transcendent salvation motif that refused categorization into merely one or the other. As there are experiences in therapeutic work that hearken to experiences had in church, so there are experiences in church that hearken to those had in therapy. I found myself vividly aware of this during Holy Week of 2019, as I reflected on how much of our liturgical life seems directed towards representing the central events of our faith, not merely as historical commemorations, but so that their meaning would be personally realized in us. The length of services, their aesthetic components, and the repetition of their central themes have as their intention that we would discover within our subjective experience the reality of the risen Christ, which can happen only if we also encounter death there as well. Our faith informs us that we are indwelt by Christ through baptism and chrismation, but this reality becomes obscured to us through sin and through the insensitivity bred through daily immersion in the world. Our goal throughout Lenten Pascha is not merely to affirm that Christ is risen, but that Christ is risen in us. Referring to this psychological dimension of Orthodox worship, Panagiotis Nellis says that patterns of church life have been laid down by Orthodoxy's deep knowledge of the psychosomatic makeup of man and of man's relations with the world, and that each particular practice stresses certain elements rather than others in accordance with its specific therapeutic and perfective function. Similarly, Kallistos Ware, writing about the services of Lent's sixth week, says they are not to be seen as the bare commemoration of occurrences in the distant past. On the contrary, through the liturgical celebration, we relive these events, participating in them as contemporaries. This transposition of past into present, of remembrance into reality, is expressed in the liturgical text above all through the word today. This presentation is based on the supposition that there exists a correspondence between what Orthodox tradition tells us about humanity and what resides within each person who comes for therapy. Though many of us may take this for granted, it is not necessarily self-evident how it is so. In one possible explanation, we could appeal to the fact that Orthodox theology reveals to us psychological truths that are otherwise undiscoverable or discoverable only through great effort. This, in effect, establishes theology's superior vantage point, even in the realm of psychological sciences, perhaps warranting the claims of what some refer to as biblical or Christian counseling. However, if a therapist who is Orthodox takes Orthodox theology as their a priori premise for therapeutic work, they will likely be criticized for dogmatism. Only if one's clientele is exclusively Orthodox might this be tolerated. Another kind of explanation, though, asserts that Orthodox theology and psychology look to the same data and condense the knowledge they garner, each according to its own mode. One might object to this way of seeing theology almost as an empirical science, because it surrenders too much of theology's unique perspective, its relationship to divine revelation. This objection overlooks the fact, though, that truth, even when it comes through the voice of God itself, is apprehended through an act of receptivity, an act of listening. Theology's ear is turned towards God, expecting to hear something from that direction. Psychology's ear is turned towards human phenomena. Listening in that direction, it unavoidably picks up the signature of divine activity, though it may take theology to explicitly point this out. According to this approach, one who sees through both lenses has an advantage over one who sees through only one, allowing for a kind of parallax, and allowing us to entertain the possibility that the insights of one perspective exist, perhaps unconsciously and latently, within the other. Thus, one perspective might spur the other on in its development. But what about the themes of Holy Week specifically? And what was it about the title of this conference, Isolation, Violence, Hope, and Communion, that inspired my reflection on the relationship between therapy and liturgical life? It was the recognition that these words describe a sequence not only of the events of Christ's passion, but also of the course of therapy, as it often appears, especially in cases where depression or even despair is amongst a patient's presenting concerns. Let's briefly trace this. First, isolation and violence are aspects, more than we might wish, of the distress that leads many people to seek therapy. Also, the kind of psychological distress that brings someone to therapy is itself isolating. Trauma especially can have the effect of pulling one out of their sense of commonality with others. They may wonder if they can be understood by anyone. This alienation is compounded in instances where one is a victim of violence. Describing trauma's isolating effects, Robert Stolorow says, "When a person says to a friend, 'I'll see you later,' or a parent says to a child at bedtime, 'I'll see you in the morning,' these are statements whose validity is not open for discussion. Such absolutisms are the basis for a kind of naive realism and optimism that allow one to function in the world, experienced as stable and predictable. It is in the essence of psychological trauma that it shatters these absolutisms, a catastrophic loss of innocence that permanently alters one's sense of being in the world." Stolorow says trauma uncovers what he and George Atwood call the unbearable embeddedness of being. As a result, he says, the traumatized person cannot help but perceive aspects of existence that lie well outside the absolutized horizons of normal everydayness. It is in this sense that the worlds of traumatized persons are fundamentally incommensurable with those of others, the deep chasm in which an anguished sense of estrangement and solitude takes form. Therapeutic work often brings us into contact with people who feel abandoned. In their own way, whether explicitly Christian or not, they experience the agony of Christ's cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Moreover, they have often incurred their wound through the actions of someone they loved and trusted. "It is not an enemy who taunts me, but it is you, my companion, my familiar friend," they might cry along with the psalmist. Holy Week services throw us squarely into the midst of Christ's own betrayal and abandonment, much of which culminates on Holy Thursday. We hear in the Matins Apostica, "Today the evil Sanhedrin has assembled against Christ and devised vain things against him, plotting to deliver him, though innocent, to Pilate to be put to death. Today Judas places round his neck the noose of money and deprives himself of life, both temporal and divine." In the person of Judas, these services lead us to contemplate not only betrayal but guilt, which itself is a frequent companion to depression. But as we know, Judas's guilt will later be contrasted with that of Peter, who ultimately finds his way to redemption. This is the genius of these days. They bring us to our existential limits, but then introduce the possibility that at those limits we might meet the mercy of God. The anointing of the sick, which is often celebrated on this day, affirms the possibility that in and through our ailments we can be companioned by the one who transforms their meaning, uniting us to life. This connection is affirmed nowhere more strongly than in the Eucharist itself, whose original celebration is also commemorated on this day. In the Matins canon, we hear the invitation, "Eat my body, and ye shall be firmly established in the faith." Holy Thursday also invites us to consider that there may be meaning in these sufferings of Christ that cannot yet be understood, at least could not yet be understood by those who are contemporaneous with them, because the end of the story has not yet appeared. The Apostica proclaims, "Today Caiaphas prophesies against his will, saying it is expedient that one man should perish for the people." And then continues, "He came to suffer for our sins, that he might set us free from the bondage of the enemy, for he is good and loves mankind." Therapeutic work includes helping a patient hold open the possibility that their current perception of hopelessness may in fact not be the whole story. We often do not know enough to decisively rule out hope, or rule out the idea that good might unexpectedly appear, although depression often convinces patients to expect only negative things. We cautiously help patients hold space for hope, being careful, of course, not to minimize their feelings of despair or cause them to foreclose upon a necessary process of pain or grief. Can we entertain the idea of correspondence between therapy and liturgy when we approach suffering at its utmost, though? That is, when we grapple with death itself? Can hope of resurrection, present at least tacitly throughout all of Holy Week, be brought to bear on suffering as it appears in a therapeutic setting? If Orthodox theology indicates something about universal anthropology or about psyche in general, is there an aspect of therapeutic healing that conveys something akin to the glory of the resurrection itself? I suspect most therapists or analysts who are Orthodox would dare to say yes, but the manner of articulating how this might be so is not easy. In what sense might a patient, removed from the ecclesiastical context, be described as experientially encountering the death-resurrection motif in a salvific way? We might find assistance in explaining this possibility in words from Paul Tillich. In The Courage to Be, he posits a kind of despair, seen in his own day and certainly in ours, in which God, the ultimate backstop to meaningless, is itself disintegrated through a doubt that seems to feed not merely on particular aspects of non-being, such as fate, anxiety, or guilt, which he saw as the ways death impressed itself on Christian consciousness during the Middle Ages and Reformation, but on non-being itself. Our confrontation with mortality now involves the recognition that we are powerless before non-being's radical indeterminacy. This is despair at its most poignant extreme, from which no ontological scheme can offer escape. There is, though, according to Tillich, a generative capacity to be discovered in this despair, and which can be found only there, that affirms despair's transcendence of itself on the basis of what he terms absolute faith. The certainty that emerges beyond the death of all earlier certainties in the images of God that sustained them derives from what Tillich describes as God above God, or God above the God of theism. Perhaps the only words remaining to indicate transcendence following such an apocalyptic end to meaning and ontology. As Orthodox Christians, we surely hear echoes of Pseudo-Dionysius's apophaticism and the Palamites' affirmation of God as the one who transcends being and non-being. But where is this theme more succinctly expressed than in the first stasis of Psalm 119, which we chant while standing before the depiction of Christ entombed, the Epitaphion, during the Matins of Holy Saturday? Now art thou hidden like the setting of the sun beneath the earth and covered by the night of death. But, O Savior, rise in brighter dawn. In this liturgical setting, we trace the movement by which despair and death are ultimately transcended by life. As Father Schmemann describes it, the Son of God enters into death. The Fathers usually describe this moment as a duel between Christ and death, Christ and Satan. At first, the forces of evil seem to triumph. The righteous one is crucified, abandoned by all, and endures a shameful death. He also becomes the partaker of Hades, of this place of darkness and despair. But at this very moment, the real meaning of this death is revealed. The one who dies on the cross has life in himself. That is, he has life not as a gift from outside, a gift which therefore can be taken away from him, but as his own essence. By this means, despair and death lead ultimately to their own undoing. As therapists, we accompany patients through such moments of death, at least the death of understandings, conscious and unconscious, that have formerly constituted their identity and life, and resurrection, at least resurrection insofar as they are helped to discover that within themselves that transcends their negative reality. This experience of death, the eclipse of what had formerly seemed certain, followed by the emergence of something more substantial and true, has significance both spiritually and psychologically. When we experience it as individuals, it breaks within us what has become an idolatrous identification between truth as it actually is and truth as we have become accustomed to conceive it. Our mental schemata, those patterns of thought that tell us who we are and who we are in relation to reality, prove themselves to be ultimately inadequate, leaving us uncertain about everything. These schemata, up to and including our image of God himself, die because they need to die. The recognition of truth's transcendence to our mere conceptions of truth is necessary for psychological health at various critical moments in our development. Temples occasionally need to be destroyed. Martin Buber, in his book appropriately titled The Eclipse of God, says, "Religion is essentially the act of holding fast to God, and that does not mean holding fast to an image that one has made of God, nor even holding fast to the faith in God that one has conceived. It means holding fast to the existing God. The earth would not hold fast to its conception of the sun if it had one, nor to its connection with it, but to the sun itself." But how do we stand the isolation that accompanies the moment of exilic darkness? How do we even know in which direction we might dare to hope? The role of the analyst or therapist in these situations can be vital. Tillich, addressing the aspect of guilt that sometimes accompanies such transformations, says, "In the communion of healing, for example, the psychoanalytic situation, the patient participates in the healing power of the helper by whom he is accepted, although he feels himself unacceptable. The healer in this relationship does not stand for himself as an individual, but represents the objective power of acceptance and self-affirmation. The objective power works through the healer in the patient. No self-acceptance is possible if one is not accepted in a person-to-person relation. In liturgical life, the representatives of the life of communion are the Baptist, the sponsor, and the parish community. In therapy, it is the therapist or analyst who is the marker of this communion, companioning one through this moment in which it seems no companionship is possible, serving as a midwife for this meaning that emerges from what is otherwise meaningless. The healer is the proxy and embodiment of that deeper ground on which the patient is just beginning to feel her or his own toes. The therapy room, just as the nave of the church, is now pregnant with the possibility of hope and communion, although in both settings we have been lamenting death. One Holy Week moment in particular is especially compelling in its portrayal of this mysterious possibility. The procession around the church, following behind the epitaphion at the end of Holy Saturday Matins. Describing its meaning, Ware says that although we sing Holy God exactly as we would at a funeral, this is not in fact a funeral procession at all. God has died on the cross and yet is not dead, and our procession through the night signifies that he is now proceeding through the darkness of hell, announcing to Adam and to all the dead his coming resurrection, in which they are all also called to share. Ware also adds an intriguing note that although there are few more moving moments in the whole of the church's year, the Greek and Slav triodia say nothing of this procession, and that it may have originated at a relatively recent period in the 15th or 16th centuries. Why is this absent from the triodia significant? Because it indicates the practice does not originate from textual mandate, but that it came into being by some other necessity as a dramatic expression of the service's inner spirit. The faithful eventually felt compelled to add these bodily movements to the reflection on the service's meaning. Perhaps this is an instance in which, had they not done so, even the stones would cry out. With this ritual of the procession, we witness those who are captivated by the Logos, enacting the movements they feel compelled to enact that indicate their participation in his transcendence of death. And what do these movements show? Having circumambulated the church, the epitaphion is held horizontally, and each of the faithful pass beneath it. Were we to see this from above, as though we were birds, we would see ourselves, the faithful, pouring out from the side of Christ, as he is depicted on the epitaphion, flowing into the church like a stream of blood and water, or as a bride brought forth from the side of the new Adam, the ultimate image of communion. Hades is destroyed, Hades trembles, and now the last theme appears, the theme of resurrection, Schmemann says. And now in this service, we turn our attention to the triumphant chanting of Ezekiel 37, the dry bones chapter. To conclude, a therapist who is orthodox is almost certainly compelled by what theology indicates about the nature of the human person. A dialogue between therapeutic theory and theology is necessary, at least in the mind of such a therapist. The therapist who is orthodox is likely persuaded by what theology reveals to be the telos of human existence, including the diagnosis of our fallen condition and our opportunity for progressive participation in the divine human perfection of Christ. This forms the basis for studies of psychological dynamics in the context of patristic teaching and aesthetic practice, especially as they point towards theosis. The approach native to depth psychology, though, involves the understanding that what is revealed in Scripture and theology is itself an instance of deep psychological structures that constitute our perceptions and experience of reality. That psyche functions by ways of mythopoeic processes. As James Hillman, a pioneer of archetypal psychology, says, we are always in one or another root metaphor, archetypal fantasy, or mythic perspective. This allows for appreciation of those moments in therapy when we see patients progressing according to patterns we see in Scripture, theology, and in our liturgical services. Conversely, we can use psychological ideas to describe liturgical experiences. A genuine dialogue is possible between these two disciplines. While this suggests various possible studies, what might be most significant is the consideration of how participation in the liturgical cycle, for example in the services of Holy Week, might in fact attune the therapist who is orthodox to vital archetypal patterns of human development that coincide with what theology reveals to be the aim of human existence. These patterns could be described as residing in the depths of the divine mind itself, as revealed in the incarnate Word, as he assumes our mortal existence at its utmost point of vulnerability. Alternately, they could be described as existing deep within created things, conveying to all things, and preeminently to the human psyche, their essential characteristics as participants in what is ultimately substrate to all existence, the divine logos. Through a process that might even be described as ascetic, the therapist who is orthodox may be especially qualified to encourage the emergence of the salvific pattern in patients who are, as we all are, finding our way along the continuum from death to life, from isolation and even violence to hope and communion.
We've got about 40 minutes. How much will you need for the practical part that you want to do?
It just depends on how much conversation people want.
All right, I was going to open it up for some questions for both of you, and then we'll see. If you have a question, come up so that it gets on the mic. I have a reflection. Somewhere when St. Sophrony was giving a talk, he was asking the question of, speaking about, I forget the exact topic, but someone in the back said, okay, Father, tell me, what is God? And Father, St. Sophrony's response was, you tell me what is man. And I think of this in light of your reflections, Father, raising the question between the altar, the services, and what happens in the therapy room. And if we think about Christ as fully created, fully human, and fully divine, at both the altar and in the therapy room, his personhood is the key, because this is where the encounter with the other, the Agape circle that you were speaking of, the altar, whether at the divine altar or at the altar of the heart, is the person of Christ. This is where these two are unified. There isn't a conflict between earth and heaven in his person, only in our separation outside of his person. So I thank you, and just stirs those kinds of thoughts.
Thank you both for the provocative reflections. Father Isaac, I would like to hear you speak a little bit more about the today, the notion of the reference to today in our hymnology. Today, he who hung the earth upon the waters is hung upon the cross. I mean, all of that imagery, that language of the present, and how, from the standpoint of a therapist, how in the context of the therapist patient relationship, that contemporaneous dimension of the narrative of our salvation history can be how it informs what you're doing, and how the significance of liturgy, as I understand it, in bridging this historical gap that we feel now 2,000 years later, right? For us to be able to say today, this is happening. I guess I would like to just hear you speak a little bit more about, either from your side as a therapist, or how you see that present moment, or that making present of the divine narrative, how you see that playing out.
It's a really good question. I mean, from the theological side, I think of the timeless eschatological perspective. There's this idea of realized eschatology, which I think some people still use that term. And it's the idea of kind of supposing ourselves into a reality that is real, although it can't be seen with our eyes. And so one aspect of the today in the services, it's as though we're challenging each other to say, what if we were to consider this as being real right now? What would that mean in terms of what our perceptions are? What implications would that have for our emotional experience, our relationships with others? Let's assume for a second that these things we talk about as coming at the end of time are here right now. And in the space of the church, let's explore what that means. And so with our hymns, with our prayers, our words of exhortation, the music and everything else, it's a chance to suppose ourselves into that reality. And lo and behold, we discover there is reality to it. There's something substantial to it. When we live in that direction, there's actually something there to meet us. And so our theology, we discover that there is ground for our theology in our experience. In therapy, I think it's a similar situation. There are many moments in therapy where we invite people to suppose themselves into other states of being that might in fact have a great deal of truth underneath them, but for whatever reason their lives haven't allowed them to entertain that as being the meaning of their lives. They don't perceive themselves as relating to truths, to those sets of truths. The idea that you can be okay as you are, that you do have the power to make a decision to change the behaviors you're doing. Because our identity is so tied up with, families of origin, et cetera, you might say our kind of fallen reference point for who we are, we don't see those things. And sometimes what happens in therapy is there's a moment when you can help somebody suppose themselves into a new frame of reference. We've been able to kind of co-create a space where we can say, well, what if? What if what we're experiencing here between us now in terms of this attachment and connection we feel, what if we assume that this is just as real as anything you've experienced before, or any story you've told yourself prior to this?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I saw a beautiful connection with the scene that with which you began, of the patient even physically regressing to an age, right? So, it's as if today they are experiencing, right, something that is not today, but
exactly.
And I think that that transcending of time seems to be happening in both directions, right?
And in the present moment, there's meaning has some flexibility and malleability. If meaning is just the story of what's happened in the past and it's trapped there, not a lot can be. But when we bring it to the fore, well, what's happening now? What does the present moment tell us about what's possible in terms of our perception of reality?
I'll add a thought on that. Yesterday, Paula presented in this room a technique she uses with traumatized people, in which she has them write a letter to the abuser, write a letter from the abuser in response to that letter, and then write a letter back to the abuser, all as if it were to happen. And that process, she said, is very healing. And other techniques I've encountered are You've internalized a negative belief about yourself from some event, some disturbing event in your life. What would you rather believe about yourself? And even being able to say I believe I'm worthless. What would you rather believe? I'm worthy. Axios. Okay? And we say in the liturgy, the holy things for the holy people of God. But we're also sinners, so we're the holy sinners. We're the holy people of God. And then we say in response, one is holy, one is Lord Jesus Christ, right? So we're becoming, but we're not there. But then also, Christ is risen now, here among us, present in this moment, as well as on this today, hung upon the cross in this moment, both together. Stavro Anastasimo, what's the word? Cross and resurrection together. And also, God is eternal, and in eternity, there is no past, present, and future, right? It's all somehow present. So these are just some things. I could close my eyes now, and I might fall asleep, but I also might remember Pericles at Holy Cross in 1993. And that's you. I can see you just as vividly in my mind. Or Father Isaac and the rocks of the Oregon coast when we went camping when we were 16. And I can still remember that like it's now. And so somehow in time, God is outside, beyond. Anyway, those are just things coming to my tired brain right now.
Any other comments or questions? Or
I'm eager to hear more about the Agape circle and how it works. So I don't know if that's part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I was thinking, and I apologize, I did not sleep enough last night, and I didn't communicate well or listen well enough there with the transition. But I was thinking that we could do a type of a discussion that's not question and answer now, but that's an experience. It's not exactly what we did in the Agape Circle, but it's something that I would like to experiment with here with us, if we are so inclined, and then in the larger group in the wrap up, to do it with everyone. If you're game for it, I will invite us to make a little circle. There's only about 10 people here. Make a little circle of the chairs, and then let's do that, and I'll give you instructions if you're willing. Thank you.
Sophie's already in a circle there.
I know, but they want to record. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So what I want to share with you, I'm very excited about this group process. It's a synergistic way of communing, almost like one mind as a group, unity and diversity. Very orthodox. And it was created by Ivan Agazarian, who's a developer of system-centered therapy, system-centered group therapy. And there's many layers to it, but we'll just start with the simplest thing, which is called functional subgrouping. And this is in contrast to stereotypical subgrouping, in which people are drawn to similarities with other people and away from differences. Human beings don't like differences. And so what would happen is, in a stereotypical group, people might speak, or if they have something to say they think would be accepted, and if they have something to say that they think would maybe not be accepted, they might just keep that to themselves. And or they might attack what somebody else said, or disagree with it, or critique it, or argue with it, or debate it, or something like that. So that's the normal way we do it. But this way, which is going to feel a little bit strange and artificial, but that's how it is at the beginning. We're trying to learn something I want to share with you. We are going for similarities in our conversation, not as an individual, each of us, but as a unity, with cohesion. So, for example, one person shares a feeling, an experience, a thought, could have to do with the things presented just now, or anything you want to talk about related, let's say, to this conference or your experience. Not just cognitive, intellectual, conceptual things, but what you're experiencing, maybe feelings, maybe sensations. And you keep it short, and you say something like, "Oh, I'm feeling really satisfied with Father Isaac's words. They really opened up my eyes, I'm really curious to learn more about him and about what he does and how he works in these two roles as a priest and a therapist." Anyone else? And so that's the clue that you're done, is you say anyone else. Now the next person to speak doesn't just head off into their own direction like we normally do, but they reflect back to that first person and say, "So you're very interested in Father Isaac, and you're very satisfied with what he shared. Did I get that right?" And then that person confirms it or says, "Well, not quite, it's more like this." And they say, "Yeah, you got that right." And then they say, "Okay." Then you turn back to the group and you say, "Well, I'm going to join on the feeling of satisfaction. Mine is more about the sunny day that we're having here, and how nice it is that we're all gathered together as healthcare and clergy and Orthodox. And I feel very satisfied about that." So it's a similarity of satisfaction, but I can pick whatever thing I want to resonate with that the first person shared, and I can then build on it in my direction. And the next person does the same thing, reflects back what that second person shared, summarizes it in a nutshell, and then finds some aspect to join on and build upon. Now, because we're a small number, that's probably what we'll do for much of the time. But then if someone has a dissatisfaction, let's say, they really don't want to join in that, they have a difference, okay, that in this type of a functional subgrouping group is welcomed. It's not like the stereotypical way. It was like, "Well, I don't really think it was that good, so I'm not going to speak," or "I'm going to say, no, this sucked." And then we're going to have some sort of bad, conflict. Instead, we're going to say, "I'd like to start a new subgroup with a difference. Is that okay?" And if the group is like, "Yeah, we're ready to hear something different than all this satisfaction," and somebody says, "Well, I'm really unsatisfied right now, and I really think that this conference is just too much talk and not enough exercise or something." And so anybody else? Now, if anybody else wants to join in the dissatisfaction group, they can find something that they join on. And then we have the two going back and forth, and somebody else wants to go back to the satisfaction, but we're all containing those different subgroups in our whole group. And then what we find is we explore the similarities in our own group, we start to see differences amongst the satisfaction group, and then we start to see differences amongst the dissatisfaction group, and by the end, we become back and we integrate the differences across the two groups. And so it makes space for difference without it being conflict. But it also doesn't leave anyone alone with their differing idea, because you come out with it into the group and you invite joining from others. So that's the process, yeah.
When you say two groups, there's still only one person speaking at a time, though, correct?
One person speaking at a time. We're all still in this circle, but let's say she and he are dissatisfied, and I and he are satisfied, and let's say there is even a third group that is like mediocre, and so I would go back and forth building upon him when we speak, and you would go back and forth building upon your dissatisfaction, but we take turns kind of who's going to speak next. But we all are aware of what's happening but the rule is that no one is left alone. So if somebody says, well, I'm dissatisfied and everybody else is satisfied, then somebody needs to find a little bit of dissatisfaction and join on that. Even if it's only, a little tiny bit of dissatisfaction, because the goal is to not leave anyone isolated or scapegoated. So that's how this process allows for lots of information to come in from diverse people without scapegoating.
Does anyone facilitate it, or do you just hope that once you've announced this, everybody's able to do it?
I'm hoping that now that you've all mastered this, we'll be able to demonstrate it in the large group.
This didn't work with the early church.
They didn't know that. So, but let's just try. Let's just play with it. It's just it's kind of for fun, and we'll see how it goes.
Question?
Yeah.
With the joining, you can join with any element of what the person has shared. So let's say you don't agree with the content, but the emotional tone.
Correct. Any aspect you want to join on. Yeah. And we may not end up with two subgroups, but at some point somebody might get a little bit like, I want to make a difference, here. So that there's room for that, freedom for that. So. Shall we begin? Who has something? And I guess they want us to record.
2:30 would go.
Okay. So they want us to use the microphone. So whoever wants to speak. Yeah. You want to take?
I just want to express my extreme satisfaction with Father Isaac's talk. My own research interests are in the formative aspects of liturgy, the way enacted narrative is actually the context in which we are formed, and so I saw a lot of resonance with what he was talking about, and I would love to explore that further in dialogue between us. Anyone else?
So what I heard you say is that you really appreciate Father Isaac talking about theology and how that is integrated with therapy?
Yeah, specifically the narrative aspect of theology, as it's invoked in liturgy.
Right. So the narrative aspect in terms of like the crucifixion, the resurrection, that aspect.
Full story of
right.
God that's centered on the Paschal mystery.
Okay. So I want to share similar sentiments that I am a psychologist and I have some background in theology, and so hearing those coming together was really exciting for me. It's like being back in school and like actually talking about these things that we don't talk about at work anymore. So I also share those sentiments. Anyone else?
Okay, so I hear you saying that you are sort of re-stimulated by the ideas of the Holy Week and the Paschal mystery and how it might overlap or interact with psychology.
Just the integration of psychology and theology.
Okay, I have similar feelings with both. I really appreciated Father Isaac's talk. And it has me additionally sort of all kinds of unformulated questions that I'm trying to think about and hopefully I can articulate that I don't have yet, but I'm appreciative of having those parts of my mind stimulated as I think about how the two interact. I too am a psychologist and think a lot about these things, but Father Isaac has me thinking about them differently, and I'm looking forward to trying to ask and discuss this more.
What you said, Stephen, I agree with what you said, but also that I also need further time to marinate, right, and to kind of digest from Father Isaac and also Deacon Marco's presentation and how it's integrated in professional life, but also personal life. Is that it? Yeah. Yeah, and for me too, on yearly, the journey through Lent and Holy Week too is, I know what it does for me, but I hadn't thought about it as far as for the other and potential others around me in journeying with me. And we are in a church community, but I hadn't given much thought, as far as how walking with people through the Holy Week journey is amazing. And also when you talked also about in God's time, taking out of our human linear lives or the traumas that bring us backwards or not, and just kind of carrying us into Kairos, to delve into that whole realm of reality of today, what Deacon Perry had said in his comments too. So that was, again, thank you, and I'm still need to marinate on this, but thank you both.
I'm hearing you express gratitude for some of the ideas, and I would just like to build on that and express my own gratitude, the generosity of your spirit and the spirit of the room, just the sense of profound understanding. Very grateful for that.
You're moved by the appreciation of all the people in the room, and I am as well, and I find myself moving between the comments that you've made about liturgical life as what is, and the what if, that what happens in between. What happens in between what if and what is. And this makes me also very appreciative that now we're in a practical form of actually kind of answering that question with the invitation of this group to encounter something together.
What I hear you saying is how grateful you are to be moving not just from the conceptualization or the articulation of our ideas, but to a kind of practice that helps us move from what is to what if. Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, what if to what is.
Yeah. And back again.
Yeah, I guess, right. Starting where we are, what is to what if, to making it something different. I also feel very satisfied with the way in which practitioners of mental health and medical practitioners are providing real examples and real life cases and stories where the ideas of our tradition, theological ideas of our tradition, seem to be confirmed as true. As someone on the theology side, we can find these ideas to be compelling, on a certain level, intellectually in our mind, but I don't always see how they play out or affect or work in real life. So I'm very grateful for that. Anyone else?
So what I heard you saying is that you're very grateful for the practical examples provided by some of the clinicians here that reflect our Orthodox theology.
Yes. confirm it.
I would say I agree with that, but I guess this might be a point where I'm asking to bring up a difference. Of course, I was that person. Funny enough, you pointed to me. I think there are examples, but some of it, as a clinician, feels still theoretical to me. I am left wondering, okay, I have these beliefs, they're presenting things that make sense to me, but I work in a government facility. I don't know how this materializes. And so I'm left still wondering how I bring this to my practice. Anyone else?
Yes, I'm appreciative of the difference you brought up, because that you were wondering, how does this all work that you believe, and that in theory is great, in a government facility where part of it can't even be acknowledged at that level?
Absolutely.
I love that. And it further underscores for me the vital importance of what we're doing right now, because the practical on-the-ground effort to put into play something in the direction of the communion with otherness is vital in living out all of what we seek to enter into in the liturgy. Without this, it becomes something idealized or ideological. So I am very enthusiastic to embrace your difference of bringing that up and this process. Anyone else?
Father Deacon, you are very enthusiastic to that your name?
Monica.
Monica brought in a difference, and you see that as relevant to how within and beyond the boundaries of the church, differences can be brought to. Is that?
Yes, and the difference was the difference she brought. I hear as a passion for the Word being made flesh in a situation where it's difficult, and it's a clash with culture too. It's fair, and it's vital, because Christ enters the world, and he says there will be a fight, there will be a struggle, and this is one example. So what we're doing now is actually risking a little bit of what we proclaim in the entire Passion Week and of our faith. And if we don't do this existentially, it remains a proclamation that's not yet enfleshed in us. So to break the mold, if this isn't done in the church, if someone doesn't say, I love it, but where is it? Or the emperor has no clothes right now, then we can sort of stay in a bubble.
Yeah, I really can join you on feeling the importance of a prophetic kind of word, and the information that differences bring, to enrich a community. That if she hadn't expressed that, then we wouldn't have heard what she was thinking. And for me, the Agape Circle was also an attempt to say, okay, we hear a lot about love. I want to feel it in my human way. And anyone else?
Yeah, so I hear you saying that you agree with the difference. Is that the word we're using? The difference about articulating things on a theoretical level, but not actually making them real in practice. And that was part of what you inspired you to work on Agape circles. Is that?
That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
And I agree with that concern, because I think I see a temptation among Orthodox to just be church mouse people who are afraid of saying something or associating or trying to speak in a government context or a non-Christian context. And yet I think that if we are not able to do that, not necessarily with explicitly theological language, but with our ideas and our way of life, our understanding of what it means to be human, then we are not being true to the mission of the church or the truth of Christ, which is really for all. So I think that it's essential that we make those connections and think about how we can bring our theology not just to the level of a parish, an Orthodox community, which is also essential, but even to those outside of Orthodoxy.
What I hear you saying is that our theological and liturgical tradition falls short if it's not extended into the existential reality of everyday life, and that, I mean, obviously one of the issues is the language that society will permit. I often reflect on the fact, though, that all of our so-called religious language was originally quite pedestrian. You know, when we talk about repentance, maybe that's meaningless to people, but it just meant turning around and choosing something else. Even faith was expressing, support for a cause. Josephus talks about, early first century people being told to repent and follow a general and put faith in him. So that language we've borrowed and made very religious, and it's now offensive in the public square, was actually quite ordinary language. So maybe we need to recover something of an ordinary vocabulary in terms of taking the central mysteries of what it means to be a human as we express in liturgy, in order to get it out there, so that it wouldn't feel like it's an obstacle in our practice of psychology or the public square or whatever.
I'm hearing you say that you appreciate the value of perhaps identifying language that actually makes sense in the world to express mysteries of faith. And along those lines, when I was casting my mind into some Paul Tillich a little bit in presentation for this, I was reminded of his idea of theonomy. Theonomy is the word he uses to refer to periods of time when language about divine transcendent things overlaps with language about earthly temporal things in helpful ways. There are periods in history when that's more the case than others, where language tends to be able to slosh back and forth in meaningful ways between those two realms, versus times when that's not the case. But and when it happens, it's kind of a miracle. When it does happen, we should take advantage of it. We shouldn't be so averse to the possibility that heavenly words can describe earthly things and vice versa, that we don't actually seize those moments when they appear in society or in personal life.
So what I hear you saying, Father, is that there are times in history that have been identified where there's an overlap between religious language and secular language. So I have been appreciating the discussion about language, and I've been turning my wheels about this for a while. And there is this saying of forget who said it. It's a saint, not an Orthodox saint, but I'm blanking. But I preach in all seasons, and when necessary, I use words. Thank you. Thank you. But it's I know I sometimes just am looking for visible results, maybe I'm not patient enough, and just like what am I doing that's making a difference, or what am I doing that is Christian? Am I embodying what I'm supposed to embody? And especially in a work environment, like it's not just with my patients, it's with my colleagues who frustrate me. It's like all around. And so like the issue for me is just from all angles. Anyone else?
So Monica has expressed her appreciation for the movement from language to life in St. Francis, and that speaks to the question I was wondering about, from what if to what is the movement from words to the heart, where they become flesh and dwell among us. And I think that's pretty central to our the truth of our faith. We're at 2:30. Thank you, Deacon Marcos, for engaging us in this way, and to each of you. This was a nice taste of what we're going to have again tonight.
Again, please take the lead in the large group and demonstrate for others how to. Well, just basically what we did was we reflected the previous person succinctly and built on the similarity. We didn't do a lot of subgrouping, and that's okay for the beginning. So I think that's what we'll probably aim for in large group. We did okay then? We did wonderful.